Oh, I keep thinking this is a mic, but it's a,
There you go.
the light. Ready? All right. Ready, guys? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming today to this presentation of the Conservation Lecture Series. My name is Whitney Albright. I'm a climate change specialist with the department. I work in our Science Institute and help to organize the Conservation Lecture Series. And we have a very exciting talk for you today. But before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to do a couple of quick announcements. As you know, we'll do the presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. So go ahead and save your questions, and for folks on the phone, please type your questions into the chat box, and we'll make sure to get those to the presenter. I also wanted to make one quick announcement. We have scheduled our next talk in the lecture series on June 19th. We'll be hearing from Dr. Nasir Idrisi, and he is with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he'll be talking about his research on fish and bird populations in the Salton Sea. So mark your calendars. That's going to be June 19th from 10 a.m. to noon. And this lecture will actually be held in our regional office in Ontario. So in-person attendance will be limited to DFW staff, but we still plan to broadcast, and we'll have everything available via Skype and recorded for you as well. And with that, I am very excited to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. MacDonald. Edie comes to us from the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. She has a background in psychology, and she's going to be talking about some of her research on the role of behavioral science to stop the decline of biodiversity in New Zealand. And I believe she originally hails from California and has been in New Zealand for about 15 years now. So please help me to welcome Dr. MacDonald.
Kia ora, Whitney. Kia ora koutou, ko iri toko ingoa no Wellington, New Zealand e Auckland aho, ko Diablo te monga, ko Columbia te awa. Tena koutou, tena koutou, tena koutou koutou. And thank you very much. What I have just done is a mihi in Te Reo, which is the indigenous language of New Zealand. Throughout this talk, I want to draw parallels between New Zealand and California. And as Whitney pointed out, one of those parallels is me. I am a dual resident in both countries, born and raised in Oakland, and did my undergraduate and graduate work down in San Diego. And then 20 years ago, while working in South Africa, met my Kiwi husband, and we moved to New Zealand 15 years ago. And we're here for a year while he's doing his sabbatical at Cal, and I get to spend 12 months with my parents in Oakland, and our daughters get to experience American culture, which they love. They've never had a big gulp, and they've never had, there was something else they've never had. Oh, Easter candy was just surreal to them, by the way. So I will always try and talk in parallels between California and New Zealand. But one of the big differences is the indigenous culture and the strength of the indigenous culture in New Zealand. So that's always important to us. We are a bicultural nation, and I'll do a little bit of the history of New Zealand and how that impacts conservation. Yes, I manage the social science team at the Department of Conservation. So the Department of Conservation, otherwise known as DOC, do not confuse it with the Department of Corrections, which is what DOC is in Australia. So I do not manage inmates, I manage people. And the Department of Conservation is similar to an amalgamation of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the National Park Services, and throw in a few other things from maybe USDA, the Department of Interior. The Department of Conservation is 30 years old. It was created by amalgamating 3 government agencies. It manages 1/3 of the physical land of New Zealand is in the conservation estate. So our mandate is to manage that physical land, but also all flora and fauna of New Zealand. And so that's our mandate, and we're also responsible for the cultural heritage that sits on that property too, recognizing the indigenous cultural heritage from those sites, and also the Pakeha, or European New Zealand community that came later. So about 3 years ago, I was recruited into the Department of Conservation from the National Museum of New Zealand, known as Te Papa Adefi, so that would be similar to the Smithsonian, to run a department, a very large department of 4. Well, it was a very large department of 2, and now we're a very large department of 4, that specifically recognizes that to gain in biodiversity, we really need to focus on humans. And so all of us that sit in this department either have psychology backgrounds, sociology, anthropology, or some form of behavioral science. It was a big shift for the department to hire a psychologist, and that's how they kept introducing me as a psychologist, and people thought I was a clinical psychologist. And my very first week, I was asked if I could help them with their relationship with their father, and I said, no, I cannot, but I can help you with your relationship with your cat. So, and I will talk about that. And at the same time that Doc was going on this journey to understand humans a little bit better, so was the all of government. So we sit in the capital, which is Wellington. And so all of government, or AOG, created a behavioral insights group. And this is really using behavioral science for better decision making in policy. This comes from the UK government that created the BIT, the Behavioral Insights team. And they're a public-private partnership right now. So feel free at any time to look up all these references that I give you, or email me or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share. So New Zealand conservation context and the environmental context is quite unique. We have a high endemic rate. Keep in mind New Zealand is because it's an island nation, it doesn't have any mammals except for 3 bats. So all of our species of birds and reptiles have evolved without mammalian predators. So we have a high uniqueness, really close to both Hawaii and Madagascar. And those countries that tend to be island nations really suffer because they have unique biodiversity and they're really at risk. So I'll talk a little bit more about it. And this is, in case you don't know, this is a kiwi. This is our iconic national bird. This is why New Zealanders are called kiwi. They're amazing. They're really friendly. They're not soft. And they can kick like anything with those legs. So they're really, really interesting. But they're really at risk from introduced predators. So New Zealand is the last country that was actually founded by human settlement. The indigenous people, or the Maori, came from the Pacific Islands about 1250 AD. At the same time, the same ancestors were going up to Hawaii. Keep in mind this flow of settlement of humans is a lot different than what went to Australia. Australia was settled about 40,000 BC. So a real big difference. And New Zealand, although it is close to Australia, it's a 4.5-hour flight, there is very little similarities between them. So just keep that in mind. Think of New Zealand as green. Think of Lord of the Rings, which was filmed there. When you think of Australia, think of Mad Max. Desert, dry, fires. So really keep that different. There are some species that can be found in both, but they tend to just be birds that can fly quite a bit. So with the Maori, so that's the indigenous culture that's there, with the Maori also started human impact on indigenous species. So within the first couple hundred years of human settlement in New Zealand, the largest ratite, which is a moa, they were giant, bigger than this room, went extinct. The largest goose in the world went extinct, and the largest eagle, the Haast eagle, went extinct. So from a very beginning, New Zealand's biodiversity was being impacted by humans. And then came the Europeans, predominantly the British. So in 1840, there was the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed between the Maori chiefs and the Crown. So that would be Queen Victoria. We refer to the government agency as the Crown, so very traditional. And it was a peaceful, relatively peaceful arrangement. Allegedly, the Crown, the British government, had realized that having wars to conquer didn't go so well in the US, in Canada, and in Australia. So they really wanted a more peaceful approach to working with the indigenous community. So it was signed, but sadly soon after that, the Crown went back on a lot of the treaty and started to do a land grab. So relatively soon, wars did follow. The Maori people were marginalized, their land was taken, and for about 150 years, the Maori people have really been disenfranchised. In the 1970s, there was an emergence, a renaissance of the language of Te Reo and the need and the recognition of Indigenous rights. And since then, the government of New Zealand has gone on a process of reconciliation. And each iwi, so that's a tribe, is recognized by the government, and they've been having treaty settlements over the last 15 to 20 years, where foremost the government stands up and apologizes for the wrong and the deaths that have occurred to the Maori of that tribe. And that's really important in Maoridom, is that honest conversation, that real eye-to-eye contact, and saying you're sorry when you actually mean it. So that goes a long way. And then, of course, there is financial settlement, and land is given back. There's also not only is physical land given back, which they're allowed to manage, but the rights to be the guardian of the mountains and the rivers is really important. So in Maoridom, nobody really owns land. You are the spiritual advisor of that land, because that land is actually a manifestation of your ancestors. So there's something called kaitiakitanga, and so a lot of these settlements allow that tribe to become kaitiakitanga of the mountain or the river, and that means they get to help make decisions about the quality of that river. In one instance, we now have co-management of a national park with an iwi, and that was because of the treaty settlement. So 15% of the New Zealand population right now identifies as Maori. Working in government, we use Te Reo quite a bit. You'll see we're the Department of Conservation, but we're also Te Papa Atifai. And you will notice that I, when possible, I try and speak in Te Reo. So it's really important for that use of the language. And biculturalism is fundamental. So that really spreads throughout New Zealand context, both conservation and society. So another similarity between California and New Zealand is after the treaty was signed, well, then came the whalers. And where did they come from? California. So they came and started to extract. The whaling, it was great for them because it already started to get difficult on the western part of the U.S. They came to New Zealand and there was plentiful whales, and they just killed until there was very few of them. What else came from California? The miners and the timber people. So we had, soon after the gold rush ended in California, a gold rush happened in New Zealand. And so a lot of American miners actually went to New Zealand. And same with the timber. You'll see in this top right photo, that's actually a tree that I will talk about. It's a kauri tree. They were giant, slow growing. Those trees are probably 1,000, if not 2,000 years old. And you can imagine, if you're a forester, you come and you see this, and it's very dense hardwood, perfect for building ships and a lot of other things. You can see they just clear cut, just like they did everywhere else in the world. So extractive industries really impacted New Zealand at about the same time California was coming into its own in statehood and the gold rush was finishing up. So just like California, we used to be pretty green and covered in forests, and then with initial human settlement, they started to burn so that they could have more open plains to catch prey and for ease of moving around and making homes. Then when the Europeans come, you can see in 1840, and then you can see in modern day, we've lost a lot of our indigenous land. So a lot of it is forest, but also wetlands, just like California. We used to have a lot of wetlands, and what happens to wetlands? They get filled in, built upon, not very good, especially when you're an earthquake-prone country. So both New Zealand and California sit on the ring of fire, and are prone to earthquakes, so not very good. One thing that's quite interesting and probably unique to New Zealand and some of the other island nations is the impact of invasive species. So a lot of the species, New Zealand's second highest concern for invasive species, and we work quite a bit with a lot of these countries that are also heavily impacted by invasive species, and I'll talk a little bit more. You can't talk about biodiversity in New Zealand without talking about invasive species, and the other one is habitat destruction. Those are the two big causes of biodiversity decline in New Zealand. So recently we had our environment Aotearoa. So Aotearoa is the Maori term for New Zealand. It means a country of the long white cloud, because there's always beautiful long white clouds over New Zealand. It's very windy, so those clouds move quite quickly. So the key factors that are impacting all of New Zealand environmental issues is the rivers are really unsafe, and that's from agricultural and farming production. So our number 2 GDP, it used to be number 1, is farming and milk production. So we have a lot of farms, and they sell the milk powder, they dry it down and sell it overseas, predominantly to China, for a really high value. And our number one industry right now is tourism. So we're a country of 4.5 million and about the size of California. So that sounds really great, like there's lots of space, but we get 4.5 million tourists. And we have small little roads. Has anybody been to New Zealand that's in the room? Great, so you know what those roads are like. I'm talking old-fashioned, really windy roads. There's no freeways. There's 2 freeways in the entire country. And those freeways are about 4 lanes for all of about 10 miles, and then they stop. So when friends and colleagues come over and fly into San Francisco and they get on the 5 or the 101, they are shocked. And my advice is, do not try and get a rental car. Take public transport or Uber or Lyft because you will get lost. You're also used to driving on the wrong side of the road. So rivers are really unsafe because of agriculture, but similar to New Zealand, although 85% of the population in New Zealand sits in 4 of the main cities, the agriculture and farming community has quite a strong voice in Parliament. So that's our government agency. So that would be like Congress. Loss of productive land due to urbanization. Just like California, we keep having immigrants come in from all over the world, and so we need more spaces for them to live. We need more mini malls. We need more shops. IKEA's just opened in New Zealand, and everybody thinks it's wonderful. So we're losing a lot of the urban and peri-urban landscape to development. Climate change is very big. As you know, both in California and in New Zealand. Being an island nation, we're really susceptible to climate change. Not only just the people on low-lying lands are going to get flooded out, but also the native species too. So our reptiles, which tend to lay eggs, and the gender of the offspring is dependent on temperature. We're seeing that change quite quickly in our tuatara, which is our iconic lizard. They look like little baby dinosaurs is how people call them. And so that's a big concern. And also our native species can adapt, but our introduced predators like rats and deer, they can adapt pretty quickly. And then finally, the thing that's a big problem is introduced predators, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So that sounds pretty daunting, but I'm actually pretty optimistic because all of the problems were caused by people. So I believe all the solutions come from people. So in my industry and in my work, I draw from many disciplines. So I am a psychologist, technically a social psychologist, or I call myself a conservation psychologist. But I draw from many disciplines that you might be aware of. Anything that's about engaging with people. Conservation's kind of late to the game in using social science to increase gains. Public health has done it for quite a long time. Psychologists have known it for about 40 or 50 years that telling people the facts doesn't work. And the environment and climate change researchers are probably more in the forefront than conservation or biodiversity. So let's have an honest conversation. What causes people to take sustainable environmental action? Well, generally, most of us sit around and we're all passionate about saving the environment and protecting biodiversity. And usually what comes up is there's 3 ways. Let's just tell the people, maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know that possums are really bad to our native species because possums eat all the eggs and destroy all the babies. So maybe we just need to show them pictures of possums eating little baby birds, and they'll be so moved and they'll now know that they'll want to do something. Or maybe we talk about the economic impact. So possums also carry TB. So farmers don't want possum around their herd because if their herd gets TB, they can't sell the milk. So from an economic perspective, farmers like to buy into predator control for possums and rats because it's about their dollar value for their milk product. Or maybe it's we need to hit them on the emotions. We do not inherit the earth. We're borrowing it from our grandchildren and we need to take care of it. And if people just cared more about the environment, they would take action. Those are all the arguments I hear quite often. And you know what? Meta-analysis show that most of those don't work. And the problem is us, those of us in the room, because we are so passionate that we often make programs designed for us and what we think. So we need to actually step back and have more empathy and understanding for the general public. They are not stupid. They do care. It's not about the economics. It's not about getting them to care more. It's about understanding human behavior a little bit more, and I'm going to walk you through it. Also, let me let you in on a little secret. Humans are irrational. They tend to be a little bit, we sometimes do things to the detriment of ourselves. But don't worry, because they're actually predictably irrational, and that's where psychology and social science comes in. There's a book called Predictably Irrational. So again, this has been well known in the social science field for well over 30 years. When I work with my colleagues that are academics in psychology, they go, Edie, this is so boring. We know this. This is not new. You're not creating any new theories. I go, I know, but I work in government, and government tends to be slow and risk adverse. And so I'm just trying to get us to do what's best practice in human behavior change. So again, psychologists feel that there's an implementation gap. The knowledge is there in the discipline of behavior change, but actually implementing it in society tends to be a problem. It's well utilized in public health. Talk to doctors, nurses, they know this. Telling someone to stop smoking doesn't work. There have been 2 Nobel Prize winners in behavioral economics. They're psychologists, but can only win it in economics because there is not a Nobel Prize for psychology, so they have to do it in economics. So I encourage you to look at either Nudge or Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which are the books that were done by Thaler and Daniel Kahneman that are really good, that talk about human behavior choices. Initially in economics, but they do a lot of choice modeling about how people make irrational and sometimes damning decisions about their own behavior. It's growing in the environment and climate change, biodiversity not so much. And a recent meta-analysis over in Australia found that still 60% of all programs that are based on trying to communicate a scientific topic to the public still rely on the old-fashioned just make information. You don't believe me? Well, this is where I normally give examples from the US and sometimes California, because I'm talking to a New Zealand audience and they love to laugh about California and New Zealand doing the wrong things. And I have an example from Texas too, Whitney, but I won't give those examples because some of you might have been involved in those projects, which would be not very good. So I'll talk about New Zealand, how even though this knowledge is out there, we still do traditional things and we're not getting the change. So, kauri. Kauri are those big trees that I showed you. They're gorgeous. They are the iconic tree of New Zealand. They're very slow growing. This is Tane Mahuta. The big trees, he is considered the grandfather of Maori. They believe that he is actually in essence a person and that he has rights. There is a disease called kauri dieback disease. It's a phytophthora, which is a fungus-like disease, similar to the same disease that is killing the oak trees. A phytophthora is killing the oak trees here in California. So it's the same sort of phytophthora. They're nasty little fungus-like pathogens, very complicated. It was brought in accidentally, probably around 60 years ago to New Zealand, and it was very slow in getting passed along until tourism took off. And phytophthora gets moved around on people's footwear. So we've done all the research and we know that's how it's getting on. It does move a little bit on cars, but what happens is forest users go in to see these beautiful trees and they don't stay on the path. They go off the path, and what they accidentally do is in stepping off the path, they're stepping on their roots because their roots are very large and very big and spread. A lot of the visitors don't know they're stepping on the roots, and they will inadvertently have a phytophthora spore, step, 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 scratch, 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 phytophthora goes in and it's spreading. So the modeling and the pictures that we have of it mimics perfectly where people go, phytophthora spreads quite quickly. So we have mitigation measures that they're trialing right now. They might be 10, 20 years in down the line and coming to fruition. So right now the project that I work on is trying to stop people from spreading the disease. So forest users doing certain things. So in 2011, there was a government survey, which we do. Governments love to survey people and ask their opinions. And in 2011, they asked people how aware they were of kauri dieback disease, and it was 31%. Well, you can imagine if that report goes to your state legislature. Oh my goodness, they were just, what? How can this happen? They threw money at a campaign. They created a new logo. They created a new website. They were very trendy and created a Facebook page for calorie dieback program called KDP. They created bumper stickers. There was an MOU between all the government agencies and the regional councils. They had road shows at all of the equivalent of the the county fairs, and gave out bumper stickers and cleaning material. I mean, they just did it all. So then they resurveyed, as government agencies do. And in 2016, it doubled. That sounds great, right? Except if you look at the next question, which was there was no significant difference in the actions people did when they entered or exited. So awareness went up really high, but people weren't changing their behavior. So that sort of success from 2016 was really short-lived when they said, oh, that's really great, everybody knows, but nobody's doing. So that's when psychologists have stepped in, and I'm going to walk you through the program in a bit. So another thing in New Zealand that's unique is that we have been quite successful at eradicating pests from a lot of our small offshore islands. So in doing that, we can then reintroduce back our native species. And these islands are beautiful. They're amazing. They're lush. The wildlife is amazing. Imagine parrots the size of chickens just walking straight up to you. They have no fear because they evolved without land predators. So they come up to you, and it's amazing. It's so loud when you go camping there. You actually need to sleep with earplugs because the dawn chorus is incredibly loud. But there's my colleague who I work with quite a lot, who's in charge of island biosecurity, stays up at night. He's quite worried about reinvasions. Not intentional by any means, but we have a lot of boaters that like to go near or around these islands. Some people can visit and some you can't. But even if you're not intentionally bringing a rat or a mouse onto your boat, which most people aren't, we actually find about 30% of all boats have evidence of rodents on them. And rodents can swim. We've got a record rat that swam 2.5 miles. So even if you don't go close to the island, that rat could jump off and swim. And so we have detection dogs and we monitor. And so everybody's really worried about reinvasion. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars when we get a reinvasion. So there's been a big program predominantly in the Auckland area to get boaters aware. And so what they thought, so they put up big signs, again, big ad campaigns, go to boat shows, tell people, blah, blah, blah. And so then I've spent some time working with the regional council up there, surveying boaters as they got on and off their boats to see if there was a relationship between their knowledge and what they did. And there was no relationship. So they knew what a pest was. They know rats and mice. They know how to identify rats and mice on their boat, but they didn't actually check for the stowaways, and they didn't actually take the actions that were necessary to mitigate having rats or mice on their boats, that is, put traps on them. So again, just because everyone thinks if the public only knew, they would take action. And I'm telling you, that's a fallacy. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you will understand that. So again, how about they just care? What if they just care more about conservation? So this is a heat map of New Zealand, and this is an annual survey again from the Department of Conservation, and the darker green is the more you care about conservation to you. And so there's two areas I want to highlight. The one in purple is the Wellington region, so that's where I'm from, the capital. They tend to be very progressive. You notice it's really dark green. They're very green. They're very environmental. I would say Wellington has a similar personality and characteristic as San Francisco. Very progressive, very avant-garde. They like being that way. Auckland, which is actually the largest city, is more LA. They tend to wear white pants and be a bit more glitzy. Again, aren't I a hypocrite? I always talk in stereotypes, and yet I tell people not to do that. So do as I say, not as I do, is what my mother always said. So the area in red is a very agricultural area. It's called the West Coast. It's very agricultural. My husband and his family hail from there. It's low economic. It's hard to be a farmer there. It's terrible land. It's really difficult. So you see from their heat map, they don't really care about conservation that much. And that's fine. You don't have to. I'm not judging. We need people that care about a lot of different things. Caring about farming is really important because it adds to the GDP of the country. So then the next question in our annual survey is, what did you do for conservation? And we listed specific things. And what do you find? Look at those Wellingtonians, the hypocrites. So they say they care about the environment, but they're doing little, because notice their green is lighter. But the people on the West Coast are actually doing more conservation actions. And there's a reason. They're not doing it for biodiversity benefits. It's because those conservation actions have direct impact on their milk price. Again, killing the possums and rats stop diseases being spread to their herd. Planting trees and riparian planting mean that they can now charge a premium product for their milk product. So just because you care about the environment doesn't mean you actually do anything about it. So we call this, well, I tend to call it the hypocritical Wellingtonian green people. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects that we do. It's a smorgasbord. I'll be light on details, but happy to talk about. So I'm going to talk to you about how do you activate these urban New Zealanders. So again, that example I showed, there's this dichotomy. They say they care about biodiversity and the environment, but they're not doing a lot. So what are we going to do? If 85% of the population lives in 4 big cities, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about Kauri dieback and visitors to the forest. And then I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is cats. So I'm going to talk about domestic cat owners. But I do a whole lot more. Yesterday, I gave a talk about social license or public opinion towards genetic tools for pest management. You can find, if you Google me, there's talks on YouTube where I've given that. Also, pest species management, that's a big thing we do. Feral cats. A lot of my work has to do with conflicts. So in New Zealand, a lot of the biodiversity challenges pit different groups against each other, and it's really about it's either human-animal conflict or human-human conflict. So we have problems with feral cats. Deer are a big problem. Himalayan tar, which were introduced as a hunting trophy, but they're destroying some of our most unique plants right now. But trying to work with the hunters to figure out how many we can kill and how to kill them is very difficult. Again, we have problems with marine mammals and humans interacting with the marine mammals. Kia are causing a big problem, so that's a bird species. They've been reintroduced to Wellington, and now they're ripping to shreds everybody's house. So now people wanted them back, and now they want to kill them, and they're a protected species, and you can't. And we're fielding calls because now people are really angry about the birds. So I do some environmental education programs. I do assessment for our education team. I've done some social impact to look at so a social impact assessment is similar to an environmental impact assessment. And this was in looking at having a small island go pest-free to look at what would be the ramifications. Big problems, like I said, in fresh water. So we do a lot of programs in that. Tourism, we touch a little on tourism. We have a huge unit that does tourism, and I often feed in some methods to that. Dogs are a big problem. They attack our native species, and perceptions of science and scientists is a big project that I work on overall for an all-of-government agency research project. So I can talk about all those, but let's first talk about how do you activate urban people. Just like in California, New Zealand is highly urbanized, and they say they care, but what do we do? And I'll always have the academic reference that's coming out, or you can talk to me if you want the paper, because in the Department of Conservation, it's our mandate to not only do good research, but to publish in peer-reviewed publications so that the information is out there for the world to see. So I've already talked about the impact of urbanization. It's growing quite a bit. Auckland is our largest city, so it's a little bit north of Wellington. It sits on a harbor. It looks similar to maybe Los Angeles in its topography. 50% of the population lives in that one region. And I already showed you that from the doc survey, people care about the environment, but they're not actually doing something. So what do? So I got a call when those initial results came out. I got a call from the person who manages Auckland and the city council and said, "We heard you're the new psychologist. Can you help us?" I said, "Of course I can." So the first thing we did is something called a segmentation study. Do I have anyone from a marketing background that's aware of segmentation studies? Okay, so in a segmentation study, it's a classic marketing technique that recognizes that when you have a group of people you're trying to engage in, we're not one homogeneous group. Instead, we are made up of small little pockets of groups that share underlying values. And so the idea of a segmentation study is you divide and identify the population into these subsets, and then you can identify the drivers of these subsets and customize programs and initiatives, both through communication but also what they might like or not like, so you can figure out their triggers and their barriers for engaging in it. But we took it one step further. In this sense, we wanted to identify co-benefits. So this goes back to that heat map that I showed you. A lot of times people want the public to engage in conservation behaviors for the right reason, to protect the birds, to stop the predators. But what we have found over many years is that a lot of the people will do it for their own motivations that have nothing to do with the birds. Do you really care? Do you care if they put out the traps to kill the possums, if it's for their milk price, or is it to bring the birds back? My personal opinion, and a lot of people who identify with this co-benefits, is like, I don't care why they're doing it, as long as they're doing it because you get the same outcome. So that's what co-benefits are. So this is a real popular topic that's in climate change. You can get people to take mitigating actions like put on solar panels on their houses for a variety of reasons. Some people put solar panels on because it's good for the environment. They feel like they're mitigating climate change. Some people do it for the economic benefits. And you know what some people do it for is to show their neighbors that they're green. And some people are really motivated by what their neighbors think, believe it or not. So that's the idea of co-benefits. And so then again, you can create strategies for engaging with them. We did not use, we collected demographics, but you don't segment on demographics, because when you start saying, oh, those 40-year-old women that live in Oakland, you know what would motivate them, or those 30-year-old men in Sacramento, you know what would motivate them, you start going down the line of being sexist, ageist, and patronizing. How many of you have gotten Facebook ad feeds that are completely wrong? They're based on your algorithm, based on the segment that Facebook thinks you're in, and doesn't it make you really, really angry? Like, that's not me. My husband somehow gets some really bizarre ones. Being a 51-year-old male, I think he's getting a lot of them for 30-year-old females that are on the hunt for a significant other, because some of the things he gets, I'm not really sure what's going on with his algorithm. So that's why we don't do demographics, we do psychographics. And so we did an online survey that was representative of the Auckland population. It was a pretty big sample size of well over 2,000. Why we did such a big sample size is that we could then look at the individual geographic regions that make the neighborhoods that make up Auckland. So those are based on our census. So that way I could give more curtailed advice to the different areas within Auckland, because Auckland's big. It's like your Sacramento region. So it's made up of several different counties coming together. And so we pull questions from the literature and in the Auckland, New Zealand context. So again, I won't go over these. These are quite nerdy, but if you want to know, feel free and I can send you the slides. But basically, we wanted to look at people's attitudes and ideas towards the environment, and we collected that from several different metrics that have been used in the literature. So we wanted to look at their connection to nature. We wanted to look at their current environmental behaviors and their current outdoor activities. We also wanted to look at their conservation behaviors. We used another measure for their connection, their relationship to nature, called the New Ecological Paradigm, or NEP. We also wanted to see how they were motivated to take action for the environment. Is it for themselves? Is it for nature? Or is it for others? Again, it's not right or wrong, but we are motivated to take action for different reasons. And then we also looked at locus of control. So that's that idea of, do you feel you have power to actually make a difference? Because there's about 50% of us that don't take environmental action because we go, well, I'm just one person. Is that right or wrong? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that how you engage with someone who believes they have the individual power versus someone who doesn't would be different. We looked at their physical health. We looked at their mental health, because there's lots of links between physical and mental health and actually engaging in environmental actions. We looked at something called place attachment. How connected are you to Auckland? This has again been shown to be one reason a lot of farmers take environmental action is because they feel quite grounded to that earth that their farm is on. So that's why they take the action. We looked at cultural values. Again, that's that lens of Maoridom that's always layered over everything. National identity. Kiwis love nature. 50% of New Zealanders go camping every summer. What is it, Alex? What's the rate in California? Like less than 10%?
Less than 10% for hunting and angling.
Oh, okay. So, and hunting and angling in New Zealand is probably at 60%. So again, a much more nature-oriented society. Satisfaction with life was again a more psychological measure. And then from a marketing perspective, we wanted to know how they were getting their information. So you throw that in, you do a giant survey, and you do some really cool stats. And what we also did is we wanted to look at their future behavior. So what they were doing in the future. We used a tool called choice modeling. This is a much better tool than just asking, hey, what would you like to do? How do you feel about recycling on a scale of 1 to 7? What happens is everybody always says 7, and that's not really telling. Instead, borrowing from economics from those 2 Nobel Prize winners, you do something called choice modeling, and you give them scenarios to choose from. So you pick different constructs, and then you give them scenarios, and they can vote on which scenario they prefer on, and I'll walk you through an example. And in this particular case, we had 3 activities we wanted them to engage in. They were picked from the local government agencies picked them, so it was tree planting, beach cleanup, rat trapping, oh, there was actually 4, and it was donating money. There's nothing wrong with donating money. Money makes the world go round, so we were quite happy to take people's money so that we could do the activity. The location, did you want to do it on your own property in your backyard? Did you want to do it in your local community or region where you'd be willing to drive more than 45 minutes? How frequent? Once a year, once a month, or every week? And do you want to donate time or do you want to donate money? And so what you do is you ask these people these scenarios. So the first one is, I would be happy to trap rats, and I'd be happy to do it by myself in my local community with a 10-minute drive, but I'll do it once a year. Or do you prefer planting native trees, donating money for someone to do that? So you would donate the money for someone to plant trees, but the trees would have to be planted within their region, and I'm happy to donate once a month. And then you vote. And all you have to do is present these questions mixed and matched, the scenario 6 to 8 different times, and then you can string up what people are more likely to do and less likely to do. So it can give you a better indication of what's the driver. Is it the frequency? Is it the activity? What's driving people's preference for it? So it's a really great way to actually know a bit more in detail about what they're doing. And it's more honest. They've done research where they show that you get a more honest answer this way than asking people like, how likely would you trap rats? So we did latent class analysis and 4 segments popped up. I'm not going to talk about demographics because there's no significant difference across the 4. So that's really important to understand. And the segments are compared to the overall average. So the first group was 31%, and we call them the environmentally active. This is the group that's doing it. They have high environmental ethos. They feel green. They are out there doing the things that they should do, and they're happy to do things in the future. What was interesting is that they just happen to have a lower degree of outdoor activity. But this is the group that's doing. So this is your converted. So the insights that we suggested for the team, for both the local regional council and the Department of Conservation's team up in Auckland, was this group is already highly engaged. They're probably going to be early adopters for new behaviors. So go to this group when you have something new. And don't ask them to do the same old thing. You've got to couch it as something new and cool and trendy. Also, because they have a lower than average outdoor activity, maybe you should push getting them outdoors more for their own health. So messages that are like, you know, go plant a tree. It'll burn 100 calories. Something like that might be quite successful. They were from the choice modeling. They really liked tree planting and beach cleanup, but they weren't so supportive of donating money or doing something regionally. The next group was really fascinating. The well-informed is not the name I had suggested. I will tell you the name later that I suggested. So this group had it all. They were highly connected to nature. They thought they made a difference. They had high knowledge about environmental problems. They didn't have any barriers. They had the money and the time and the resources. They cared about the environment. They had a very low rate of doing anything. So I wanted to call them the hypocrites, but you know, the marketing team said that wouldn't go over too well, Edie. And this is why I'm not in marketing, I'm in social science. So they had everything going for them in theory, but they still did very little. So that's why we call them the well-informed. Knowledge campaigns wouldn't impact them because they already know. So instead, what we found from doing a little bit more analysis is that this group had owned a lot of dogs. So they were high dog ownership. And they took a lot of walks, you know, almost daily walks in their neighborhood or in their region. So we said encourage them to do activities that impact their dog walking route. Connect through them with their dogs. And they actually are a really high gardening group. So again, encouraging them to do more activities on their own property so that their own property increases in value with native species and they stop the invasive species would be really good. We also suspect that this group would be highly susceptible to messages of what their neighbors were doing. So telling people what your neighbors are doing works incredibly. And all of you that are laughing like, oh, I wouldn't, I guarantee you, telling people we are little sheep, we follow each other. Now, we don't like to admit that, and there's some fantastic research out of Cal State San Marcos for the last 15 years that has shown this, that using normative influences and messages of telling people what their neighbors are doing gets people to substantially change their behavior. But when you knock on their door and go, why'd you change your behavior? Is it because of the neighbors? They always go, oh, no, I would never follow what the neighbors did. But they do. And that's because, again, humans are a bit irrational. We don't quite understand our own behavior. We're not good at filtering our own behavior. So there's lots of tips and tools about feedback and norms to increase action. So we suggest using those, which we've started to do. They're really hip on tree planting and beach cleanup, and they want to do it themselves. They don't want to go to planting days that are facilitated by the council or the government agencies. And they don't like rat trapping, and they don't want to donate money. The next group is active outdoor, and by the name it implies this group spends a lot of time outdoors. They are high recreators, and they tend to be recreators not just in walking, but those extreme sports. So really big bicyclists, mountain bikes. They do a lot of water activities because the Auckland's on the bay. So they have a high level of outdoor activities, but they are actually using nature from a very utilitarian perspective. They're not stopping and smelling the roses or appreciating the flowers that are out there. It's very much for them. So they don't have a strong connection to nature, they don't have a lot of knowledge of the environment, and they're not actually doing anything to protect the environment. So what we suggest, and some of the barriers where this group did mention that transport and money were the key barriers, which is quite interesting. So we said target them through their recreational groups. So talk to the mountain bike groups and go, hey, you know what? If you actually put rat traps out along your mountain bike, it means you get rid of the rats, and those rats burrow and put holes in your mountain bike track, and you're more likely to fall off when rats are around. So by putting rat traps out and removing the rats, you're going to decrease the number of times you fall off your mountain bike. Or actually, we need you to plant some trees along your mountain bike path because it'll be good for this reason and that reason. And so we've started doing that. And there's actually a mountain bike group that has started to do that, and it's been quite successful. So it's a great way to introduce people who wouldn't normally take conservation and environmental actions, tied to something they already love and do, and show them the co-benefit. So this is co-benefit so that they don't break their arm while mountain biking. It's pretty cool. They're the least adverse to rat trapping. Let me tell you, nobody really jumps up and down to put out rat traps in New Zealand, but they do. It's quite interesting. They are, and they don't really want to plant trees. So that's great. That's why we've suggested rat trapping to the mountain bike clubs. The final group is amazing. It's the opposite of the well-informed. This group, not connected to nature, it's not really aware of environmental problems, not really going outdoors, but they do the most of any of the groups for the environment. So again, it's this paradox. We think if people care, they will do. And our research, not just this research, but other research, time and again shows overall caring for the environment doesn't result in specific sustainable actions. So they do the most, but they're doing it for other reasons. And what we know from some of the research, the reason they're doing it is for social benefits. They're doing it because someone in their house or for other social benefits wants them to. So lack of interest is a common barrier. They just don't care. So don't try and push, save the environment, it's good for the earth. Push the social benefits. And what we've started to do is partner with local churches and clubs where these people tend to aggregate in, and we work through their existing clubs to have environmental actions. So we've done a recent program through Pacific Island churches where we've encouraged their members to go hiking, and at the top of the hike they have a little talk about the environment and how we need to take care of it. And so they're out there getting health benefits, they're out there being social, which is what they really care about, and then they're getting some environmental action. And then we hand them a plant to go back and plant at their house. So these are all projects that we've initiated based on the segmentation model. Now we're evaluating their success so we can better invest in how to engage with different community groups. This group is really hip on their own garden. They actually really want to donate money. So this is the group that you could get money out of. And they do want guidance. But they don't want to do it in the region. They're happy to do it locally. So that's really important. So that's a classic segmentation model. The next project I'm going to talk to you is on cats. Oh, cats, cats, cats. There's a lot of cat work that I work on, but this one is a very specific project that we were looking at owned cats. So owned cats. So there's a big problem in New Zealand, both with domestic and feral cats on biodiversity. So cats are great killers of our birds, but they also kill our reptiles. So we quite often catch feral cats, cut open their stomachs, and there's a picture, I didn't want to put it up there, but it's 22 Otago skink in the belly of one cat. So in one fell swoop, they can just obliterate our reptiles, and they do. So we recognize in New Zealand that there's different types of cats. There's feral, unowned, and owned cats. This project I'm going to talk about, we intentionally picked low-hanging fruit, which we thought were owned cats. And we wanted to pick cats where the owners took them to veterinarians. Again, we were trying to go for the easy win. These were responsible cat owners. But even the modeling suggests by my colleague Jolanda van Heestek, who's out of Otago University, that even cats in urban areas are such a problem on native bird species that they're causing a decline over 10 years. So we know domestic cats in an urban area are a problem for biodiversity, specifically the birds. So we wanted to target cat owners going to veterinarians. We got funding from the New Zealand Animal Companion Trust, and it was supported by the New Zealand Veterinarian Association, which was critical because previous research showed that cat owners really listen to veterinarians. So we wanted to build and capitalize on that. We worked in over 40 vet clinics in the 5 major cities. So that was a big project with a lot of veterinarian clinics. And it's amazing how well the vet clinics, once they caught on, wanted to participate in this project. So the first thing we wanted to know is, so cats are a problem. What's the solution? So when you get a whole bunch of biologists in the room and you're like, cats are a problem, what's the solution? Well, in New Zealand, we vary from get rid of every cat, make them illegal, to nothing, cats are fine. They're not a big problem, and everything in between. The cat conversation in New Zealand has become quite emotive and quite derogatory. We have a certain individual who's a very prominent environmentalist, but he's vehemently anti-cat. His name happens to be Gareth Morgan, and I say that because he shows up in the survey later. And so he wants no cats. And he thinks I have colleagues that say there's no good cat but a dead cat. Farmers don't like cats because cats transmit toxoplasmosis. And again, what does that do? If your herd gets toxo, you can't sell the milk. So farmers don't like cats. But again, we're just focusing on the urban cats, so toxoplasmosis doesn't really fall into it. So the first thing when you have a problem, but you have lots of solutions, is a tool called behavioral prioritization. Think about this. I go to the doctor's yesterday and goes, Edie, you need to get a bit healthier. And I go, what does that mean? You need to stop eating so much red meat. You need to cut down on alcohol at night. You need to go exercise a little bit more. So you need to, that's 3 miles a day. You need to not stress so much. You need to do this and this and this and this. What happens when I leave the doctor? I go, okay, back. So if you focus on too many things, nobody's going to do anything. And you can't focus on the best thing. If the doctor goes, well, Edie, I really need you to run a marathon tomorrow and then you'd be okay. That's not realistic. I don't commit today to being in better shape and wake up tomorrow and try and run the New York Marathon. But in the biodiversity field, that's quite often what we look for. We're looking for the golden bullet of what's the perfect solution for biodiversity. So behavioral prioritization is a tool that's really important so that you avoid those problems of either picking the wrong behavior to advocate or picking too many. And it's a simple mathematical formula. And biologists and ecologists, they love their numbers. So this is a quantitative way to pick a behavior to advocate to the public. And all it is a simple trade-off. You figure out what the conservation impact is, What's the probability of adoption between your target group and the current penetration rate? You put those together and you get a number, and the behavior that has the highest number is the behavior you should focus on. And I'll walk you through what we did. So we had a list of behaviors. It could be cat in at night, cat in 24 hours a day. They could wear a collar. Have you seen, there's a lot of these. So in New Zealand, the cat predation is a little bit different than in Australia and in the US and the UK. Again, because we just have birds and reptiles. Cat collars with bells don't work. Our birds don't hear. Our reptiles don't hear. So they've tried those neoprene collars that are really big. They look like baby bibs, or the scrunchies that go around the cats. So those have been quite successful in Australia and probably would be successful in New Zealand. But you've got to get owners to want to put them on. So desexing, we looked at registering a cat like a dog, contain the cat to property via a fence. Coming from California, when I had cats, my cats lived indoors because I lived on a canyon in San Diego. And who was in those canyons? The coyotes. We don't have that problem in New Zealand, so we don't have anything that eats cats. Some people have suggested introducing something that eats cats, but again, we won't go there because usually when you introduce one animal to control another, it doesn't ever go well. So microchipping, declawing, which is actually illegal in New Zealand, but we threw it in there anyhow, restrict a cat to a cat run, and then limiting the number of cats. So what we did is we went to the literature, and all my colleagues on the project, we then gave a conservation impact of 1 out of 10 for what was the conservation impact of those actions. 10 being the highest. So if you went just for the pure conservation activity, it would be advocating cats in 24 hours a day. At this time of research, less than 2% of the public was keeping their cat in. So now you're going to try and convince 98% of the public to keep their cat in 24 hours a day. Again, when I moved to New Zealand and suggested that, everybody was like, that's disgusting. You have to have litter boxes. That's awful. Oh, no, cats need to run outside. They need to follow their wild instinct. So there was a lot of psychological constructs that people in New Zealand were caring about keeping cats in 24 hours a day. So if you introduce that, it would probably be dead in the water right away. And so then we went into the probability of adoption. So we surveyed cat owners at vet clinics, over 200 of them, and asked them what was their probability of adoption on a scale of 1 to 7, how often they were doing it. But we added another column called cat welfare, because what we noticed is veterinarians, like I said, in New Zealand have a strong influence over cat owners. So we wanted the veterinarian's opinion on what that behavior would do on cat welfare. What's interesting is a lot of New Zealand vets think it's cruel and unusual to keep cats inside 24 hours a day. So if we pick cats in 24 hours a day, we would have lost the support of the New Zealand Vet Association. So you throw all of that in, you multiply everything up, and then you get a rank. And you see cat in at night came in number 1. What was interesting is my colleagues still said, but Edie, I want cats in 24 hours a day because it's best for conservation. And I said, I know that, but you can't expect people to run a marathon tomorrow. We just want them to walk down the street for a couple of blocks. So it's about stepwise change, which is how humans tend to change. We don't change drastically, we tend to take steps. So once we did that, we needed to figure out, so we picked cats in at night, and then we used another psychological theory called theory of planned behavior. And this is very common in public health, and again, it's been used in the environment, and it's been recently validated in conservation. What it says is that behavior is made up of 3 things. It's your attitude towards your behavior, the normative influence, so people who are important to you, what they think, and also how much control you have over them. So it's a quantitative survey. I asked a whole bunch of beliefs, over 32 beliefs, to the cat owners at the veterinarians, and correlated them to would they keep their cat in at night. And so there was a list of 32, and I'm going to show you the key ones that were important and not important, because it kind of shows you what you should target and what you shouldn't target. So when you look at attitudes, people really kept their cat in at night because of the cat safety aspect, especially being getting hit by a car, and because their cat liked it. They were not keeping their cat in at night because of the impact on native wildlife. So a campaign that advocated keep your cat in at night because it won't kill the birds would be ineffective. When we looked at norms or the different groups that could influence, we found veterinarians and family members to be really important, but not the SPCA, not the Department of Conservation, Forest and Bird, which is our version of Sierra Club, and Gareth Morgan, that gentleman I told you about. So having him front a campaign would not be successful. He was actually negatively correlated did with keeping cats in at night. So if he told people to keep cats at night, they would intentionally put them out just to make them angry. So, and then the final one was, did they feel that they had control over it? Because a lot of my colleagues go, oh, Edie, but keeping cats in at night means I need a litter box. And so what was great is the research showed is that the cat owners were not impacted by litter box or cat flap issues. Because if they had come up positive, that meant we would have to give away litter boxes and cat flaps to enable people to do things. So you put that all together, and we worked with our marketing team to come up and test the 3 different options. So keeping cats in at night was not significant. So this is a copy of a poster. All the posters got hung in the veterinarian clinics. 1/3 got this treatment, 1/3 got the second treatment, and 1/3 got a control, which is a neuter spay message. So you as a cat owner would come in, you'd register, and then when you sat down, one of our research assistants who was at university would follow a script and ask you to fill out a survey. And so you'd fill out the survey, which asked you a whole bunch of questions about cat welfare. We hid the questions that we cared about. And then we would give you a pamphlet. So either you receive this pamphlet. So this is the veterinarian cat safety message. Keep Fluffy safe from cars, bring your cat in at night. And so then we had some facts. So this goes back to the System 1, System 2, if you're familiar about it. Some facts, they're true, so we would never lie. And so you would be given that. If you were in the second treatment, you had this adorable photo. You have to believe that because that's my daughter, so she was the model. So it says, I love it when Fluffy sleeps on my bed, bring your cat in at night. So that's, again, the cat likes it family. And then there's some benefits to bringing your cat in at night about mental health and stress, reduction of stress. And so you got that. And then you went away. And 6 weeks later, we emailed or called you based on how willing you were to be followed up. Cat owners love to talk about their cats. We had a response rate of up to 70%. They were calling us at 9 o'clock at night. Oh, I got your survey. I want to tell you about my cat. We were like, okay, I was in bed, but sure, call me back, you know. So it was really cool. So this way, and then we had the control group. So we could follow up, and they weren't quite sure. You know, we would ask a whole bunch of questions on cat welfare. So they kind of didn't really know what we were studying. Here's the results. So the change in people bringing cats in at night for the child like it was almost 10%. The vet safety was just at around 1%. What's interesting is the control dropped quite substantially. So again, go back to your methods, your introduction to methods. You should always have a control. And the reason the control probably dropped where they were more likely to put their cat out at night is because we had the time difference. So we had just gone into spring and sprung forward, so the weather was getting nicer, and so probably people were probably letting their cats out more at night because the weather was nice. So again, from this, we could roll out a whole campaign where we advocate your family and putting those messages in. When I called up the vet clinics and asked them, we're done, you can take the posters down, they go, no, can we have more? We love it. So we made another run of them and gave them out. So that's the cat one. The final one is calorie dieback. So again, these are beautiful calorie tree. We've got lots of reports online. If you Google calorie dieback, there's lots of reports about this. We have studied this to death. That's probably the wrong use of words when you're talking about calorie dieback disease. So calorie dieback, numerous studies to date show there's a low compliance. So when you study forest users, this is great in psychology, I hire students to hide in bushes and watch people. So that's what I do. I hire students, psych students, and I hire them and I pay them. Go pretend like you're a bird watching. So they sit and they pretend like they're watching birds, but they're really watching the people. And they record their behavior. And what happens is, it's so classic. When people would leave the forest, so there's these cleaning stations that they're supposed to scrub, spray, and clean their boots. And I'll show you an example of that. When they leave, one researcher hops out and they have their university sweatshirt and their lanyard that identifies them. They go, hi, I want to ask you some questions. And do you care about the calorie dieback? Are you aware of it? And did you clean your boots? They're like, yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. What they don't know is the Confederate, one of my other observers, was watching them, and they mark it. And guess what? People lie. Over 90% said they cleaned their boots, and it was around 40% actually did. So you've got to be careful with self-report because people think they're doing it for the right reason. Of course I cleaned, and they didn't. So we know from all the research, people aren't cleaning, knowledge isn't helping, and more information campaigns about caring for calorie trees in the forest aren't going to cut it. So these are what, in 2011, remember I told you that was the initial report where it said only 30% new. So we have really, you go to parks and there's really crappy signs and there's spray bottles up there that they were supposed to grab. I don't know if you can see on the bottom, there's a little white brush somebody was supposed to find in the bushes, and you're supposed to scrub, 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 and you spray with Sterigene, which is a biodegradable cleaning solution. Or we had these other places where you could walk over this grate and you were supposed to scrub, 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 get all the dirt off, and then spray with the Sterigene. And you can see we have this brand new logo, and we had pictures and stuff like that. And it was like, save our Kauri forests. So then in 2011, we got a huge kick of funding to upgrade this because that didn't work. And so we upgraded where we did this funneling idea. So this idea was that in some of the cleaning stations, you got funneled like a cow, into a place, and that would force you to clean, right? So if we force you, and then we got a little bit more authoritative. Danger, stop spreading Kauri dieback. So we got more authoritative, which I did the research that said being more authoritative is what we should do. And look, there was a really small spot, and we spent so much time researching these icons, because we were concerned people didn't understand what cleaning meant. I mean, we studied that icon for 6 months. We tested it. And so I still didn't believe this would work because I'm a psychologist, and I know that you can build it, but it doesn't mean they're going to use it. But our Capital Works people swore on their hearts that it would work. And I was like, fine, we'll research it. You do your best. I'll help you. And so initially, it was 12% compliance. After this massive multi-million-dollar upgrade, compliance went to 25%. That's not enough. We need compliance over 95% to mitigate the spread. So they said, okay, Edie, now you can do your psychology studies. So I said, yay. And so we've just done these this summer. So it took us 2 years to do these psychology studies. And the problem is real common in a lot of environmental issues. As I've told you, people are irrational, but they're predictable. They're suffering from one of 3 reasons for why they're not cleaning. Something called optimism bias. I love the forest. I couldn't be part of the problem. It's those other people. Everyone kept telling us it wasn't them, it was those people. And they tended to say it's those foreign tourists. They're not cleaning. So in all of our surveys, we would ask people where you were from. And guess who was the most likely not to clean? The locals who lived within 10 miles of the forest. Because they believed they could see the disease, which you can't, it's microscopic, and that they wouldn't possibly transmit it. So that's a problem. It's them, not me. Another one is diffusion of responsibility. I'm just one person. Why does it make a difference? So that's real common, like I can't help. I just saw someone not clean. If he's not cleaning, I'm not going to clean. So it's kind of a defeatist. And the other one is learned helplessness, again, which is a defeatist. Like, they're dead. They're dying. It doesn't matter. It's too late. I'm going to drive my Humvee and kill the earth because it's going to go anyhow. So I might as well get mine while it's still alive. So we can actually draw from psychology to prevent these. So what we did is we trialed 5 different methods. The one is a normative messaging. So again, telling people what others do. It actually works quite well. So in environmental conditions, telling people for shoppers worked really well. So a simple sign that was put in shops that says, shoppers in this store believe that reusing shopping bags is a worthwhile way to help the environment. We thank you for helping the environment by continuing to reuse your bag. When stores put this in, they get a reuse of about 90%. Simple, cheap. Another one is something called a seeing eye effect. So just simply putting up a pair of eyes increases compliance. So this was at a university. Just by doing that, they diffuse people stealing bikes. You put these at honesty boxes. I put them near refrigerators so people don't steal the wrong lunches in communal lunches. So a really simple set of eyes. Nothing else. There's no other sign that says he's watching you or she's watching you. Just a simple set of eyes. Amazing impact when it comes to honesty. So in New Zealand, just like in a lot of places in the U.S., biosecurity, there's a big concern about transmitting of things. introducing things that would destroy the agricultural. And so in New Zealand, when you land, you go through this big biosecurity. They have sniffer dogs. You go through, it goes womp, womp, and there's all these noises. You get an instant fine of $400 if you bring fresh food in. So when you're greeted at the border, you get this biosecurity schema. So people really understand biosecurity. So what we said is, let's make those cleaning stations as ugly as possible. So you're in nature, and then all of a sudden you see this ugly biosecurity schema. I'll show you a picture of it, and it's god-awful ugly. But it might work, because sometimes the juxtaposition might be enough to jar people into action. And the final one is real classic, is a pledge wall. You just get people to make a pledge. I promise to clean my shoes when I enter and exit the forest. We don't like to be seen as hypocrites, and so just getting people to pledge often changes behavior. And so we've just completed the data. So each treatment, there was 3 sites. So this is what it looked like before. So it was one of these classic, you know, you funnel, there's brushes. It had these terrible signs that was about keep calories standing. It was all very factual. And so we didn't change the physical structure at any of these places. We just changed the signage that went around it. Each treatment had 3 sites. It was A, B. So we did 3 weeks of testing and observing people before in just the normal condition, and then we introduced the new treatment and we observed it. We did, again, 2 researchers, behavioral observations and intercept surveys. We have over 10,000 bits of data. Well, 10,000 people we watched, so we're still analyzing the data, and the statisticians are busy. So this is what they kind of look like. Again, it's a little bit hard when you're trying to do photographs in the forest. The lighting doesn't go too well. So the normative message says 90% of people are brushing their shoes. And it was the thumbs up, the emoji thumbs up, because we had tested that. That was better than a smiley face. So we had tested that, and it just says brush, inspect, and spray. And so that message was sprinkled all throughout. You can't quite see, but very up here, you see there's some eyes watching. So they were hanging down. So it doesn't look good in the picture, but we actually tested this because in Maoridom, the eyes are actually looking at someone is a sign of aggression. So although the research from the Seeing Eye Effect says use male eyes, we went to a Kaumatua, and the recommendation, that's an elder, was a set of female eyes. So that's actually a woman from the local iwi who said she would front the campaign, and we got her eyes. So she's an auntie. So in Maoridom, an older woman is called an auntie, and there's a lot of respect and reverence. And so we could not be culturally offensive, and so we use that. So it'll be interesting to see, would a pair of eyes work? So those are those 2. And then the other one was the pledge wall, and this is the ugly biosecurity one. So imagine you turn the corner and you see that. So we'll see how well those work. Analyzing the data, and my research assistant, I'm like, come on, just look a little for my talk, and she goes, I can't, Edie, you know I can't do that. So unfortunately she wouldn't sneak a peek at the results to tell me anything. So that's sort of the research that we do, that it's about changing behavior. So in conclusion, the use of psychology and social science has been used quite a lot in the environment, and it's been emerging in conservation. In the US, there's actually the Conservation Psychology Institute that's been being run for the last 5 to 10 years. You can find that out of, so it's run by a consortium. There's actually a book called Conservation Psychology of prominent people. You have a lot of great academics that work in the US in this field, and then the human dimensions of wildlife conservation. There's an annual conference, and it alternates between being in the US and overseas, and this year it's in Estes in Colorado. So you have a lot of resources, and you also have Alex, who's your department's human dimension researcher. So you have a lot of resources that if any of these problems sound similar, you can always talk to me. We welcome all visitors to New Zealand, but you also have lots of resources that I can connect you with too. And so at the end of it, use theory to drive change. Don't use your gut, because your gut is biased and it's probably wrong. And again, those are the topics that I work on, and there's many more, but I'd be happy to talk about those. And now I'll take questions.
Question for Edie?
Is this something that you studied in New Zealand, or did you just fall into it, or how did you get into this
Sure. So I went to UCSD as an undergrad. So I was a psychology major and a biology minor. And then I went to San Diego State and did my master's in experimental psychology. And I have a psychology background, and I've alternated between studying humans and animals. And for the last 15 years, I focused predominantly on humans. So my PhD is in environmental studies, where it was on cats and human behavior. So I am academically trained in this area. So it's not something that I necessarily stumbled into, but it's a new emerging field. And by no means do you have to be academically trained. There's many resources that are out there. If you just have an open mind to understanding humans, you can do it.
I've been to a talk about marbled murrelets, which are a species of concern in forests, and in some of our parks, one of the big issues is that there are jays that will depredate their nests, and having campsites nearby will increase the jay population and reduce the nesting sites. So this talk was saying that basically, similar to what you were saying, providing more information didn't change behavior, but just providing like a sign that says, do this, keep it comb clean, is like a better option, or like improves behavior.
Yep.
Is that pretty typical?
Yeah, and my suggestion would be always do a research. I'm not just trying to give plug for research because I'm a researcher, but every situation is a little bit different, and that's why you test and you test. But it's simple. Hiring students is cheap. They're we do pay the living wage in New Zealand, not the minimum wage. We pay a decent amount, and you put them out there for 2 weeks, and you've got your answers question. And I always say, how many hours did all of the more higher ups sit in meetings arguing over what the solution is? Just give me 3 weeks and I'll go collect data, and then we'll have the solution. And I'm lucky that I now have a boss and a boss's boss and a boss's boss's boss who support that approach. So they'll sit there and argue, and then they're like, all right, Edie, you go for it. Use your psychology and try and answer the question. And sometimes I'm wrong because people are complex.
So we have a couple questions on Skype that'll reach you, and if you don't mind kind of reframing them.
Sure.
Or I can come closer.
Sure, I'll come closer to you.
Tag team this so that folks on the same here. So the first question is, what are the reasons you have found that people distrust science and scientists, and do you have suggestions on how to interact with the public to combat this?
Yes, so the distrust in science and scientists is well rooted. So there's different types of distrust. You have people that are just inherently distrustful of everything. So all agencies, it's not just science and scientists, it'd be government. I suggest that there's not a lot of ways you can combat that. So we're doing some focus groups right now, and their distrust stems from personal experiences. Whether they're right or wrong, they actually feel quite distrustful because sometimes in their history of their life, a science or scientific information let them down. We know as scientists, you get a p-value, it doesn't mean it's perfect. We jump up and down when you get the p is less than 0.05, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily right. Doctors make mistakes. We make mistakes. I think scientists need to be much more transparent in our data collection and our results, and we need to start speaking from our value system, and we recognize that we are not perfect. We are not the definitive voice. Also, some people just don't value science. They're driven by other value systems. So I think, again, start speaking from a value system that might work. That's a big project that we're working on right now, the overall distrust in science and scientists. So we can always talk a little bit more about the metrics we used in our findings in New Zealand.